Hey folks, it's Dave Silva, and you're listening to Grilling JR without the voice of wrestling, Jim Ross, and Conrad Thompson. Now, folks, we've had a case of the perfect storm. Jim is under the weather and isn't feeling well today, so we want to say a prayer and send good thoughts to him that he's feeling a lot better and gets better before Double or Nothing this weekend in Las Vegas. And Conrad, well, he's just having rig issues. He cannot get his rig working. We've unplugged, plugged, turned on, turned off, checked batteries. We've done everything we possibly could. And for some reason, his rig's not working. So today, we are going to take a look back at King of the Ring 1997. Now, this is a time in the WWE where the WCW was winning the ratings, and they are hot. Week after week, WCW is dominating the ratings. And Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation are the lead heels in the company. Bret's disagreements with Shawn Michaels are really stirring up and getting hot. The Undertaker's the champ. Stone Cold is on the rise. Guys like Mankind, Goldust, Triple H, their characters are starting to be solidified for the upcoming Attitude Era. This is a time in the WWF where we're kind of in that middle stage where we're not super hot yet, but we're really close. So we're going to look at King of the Ring 1997 and take a look through Jim's eyes as he was in the company and working there and dealing with all these different attitudes and all these different talents during this time in 1997. And if you're wondering, hey, well then when are you going to do Mark Henry? Well, don't worry. We are going to celebrate Mark Henry and his wonderful career and everything he's done in the business. And we love Mark Henry here at Grilling JR. So don't worry. We will get our Mark Henry retrospective career look. We will do that in the future because Mark Henry deserves all the flowers in the world for everything that he's contributed to the world of professional wrestling and our lives. We love Mark Henry. So please sit back, enjoy this best of, say a prayer for Jim, say a prayer for Conrad's rig, so that we can be back next week talking all things professional wrestling with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with good old Jim Ross. Jim, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good, buddy. I could not be better. It's a great week here in Oklahoma. My lady Sooner softball team got eliminated by UCLA. I was all in, by the way, on the College World Series. I will tell you that last week, I know you were out of the country. It was a good thing because I was going to call you when my Sooners they didn't eliminate, but they beat Alabama. But boy, Alabama's got a good team, and it was fun. I was just bullshitting you. I wasn't going to call you, but it was, I'm able to spend with this AEW thing now. I got a little bit of my life back. And I do things that people probably wouldn't suspect me doing, and that was including going to the Women's College World Series, which I think is a very underrated event. I enjoy the hell out of it.
Well, and I'm looking forward to talking about our topic today. It's King of the Ring 1997, and Jim, you watched this for the first time in a long time this week. What did you think?
I sat outside yesterday and watched the entire show on my iPad, believe it or not, and I got into it, and I liked it. I remember so many nice memories of things that I had forgotten about. I had forgotten that Vince McMahon and I were the broadcasters on that show, and the King, who was on our team, our three-man team, which is a kind of the exception, not the rule, the three-man philosophy I have, was in the tournament. So he did not broadcast that night, which made him extremely happy. I do recall that. The King was almost euphoric. The fact that he got to wrestle on the pay-per-view and didn't have to sit out there for 3 hours and broadcast one. So it was an underrated show. I thought the Austin Michaels rivalry and that it was a little bit forgotten from that match. They had a hell of a match, by the way, and there was Triple H. Paul Levesque got his opportunity to get on the get noticed, start getting a push, as it were, after he'd been punished, whatever the hell that meant, from the curtain call we talked about before. So that was a big start for him, and I'd forgotten how good Goldust was, to be honest with you. God dang, he's talented as hell in that gimmick he did. And he and Terry, his wife at the time, Marlena, that was a good booking. That was a good, creative piece of business, in my opinion, and it really worked well, I thought. And looking back at it, you kind of regain your appreciation for how good they were together. There's also another saga in the chapter of Ahmed Johnson. That was always an interesting road to travel. So Farouk.
There's just a lot to get into on this show.
Yeah, it's a ton, and there's a lot of backstory. I look at these shows that we do, Conrad, and of course these are your ideas, and I love them. I love for you to call the plays, and that is the fact that these things are like we're talking about a show or an event, but it's also about a big ensemble cast surrounding that event or show we're talking about. So, and this one's got a massive cast that we can talk about.
It does. And it's almost like a time capsule. And I want everybody listening to the show, if you're digging what we're doing here on the new format here on Jim's podcast, Grill and JR, tell a friend. Even though something may be titled King of the Ring 97, it's really more of a snapshot of the summer of 1997 in the WWF and all the news and notes. Because we're not just going to cover the show as if it happened in a vacuum. We're going to talk about the things that got us there as well. Of course, King of the Ring went down on June 8th. So like 22 years ago from this weekend at the Providence Center right there in Providence, Rhode Island. And this is a pretty crucial time for the WWF. The NWO is running roughshod over in WCW, and they are running away with the Monday Night War. So we're trying to play catch up here on the WWF side of the fence. We're on the heels of WrestleMania 13, where maybe the original plan was Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. Shawn pulled up lame in February, lost his smile, and chaos was created. So Bret wound up working with Stone Cold Steve Austin in an all-time classic, one of the best matches in company history and even wrestling history. The main event, of course, became the Undertaker's night, where he beat Sid Vicious, and then we would transition into Cold Day in Hell in May, where we would first see Steve Austin get his first world title singles match on a pay-per-view, which he lost against the reigning world champion, the Undertaker. And there's lots of backstage drama going on at this Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels saga continues to evolve, and the Hart Foundation is now going strong. No longer just a couple guys. Now it's a whole roster of dudes. It's Brian Pillman, and it's Jim Neidhart, and it's Owen, it's Bret, it's Bulldog, and the Nation of Domination is really starting to take off. Kane is about to debut in just a few months. There's just a lot going on here. So let's sort of hit the reset button and talk about, something you were involved in. Contracts. Dustin Rhodes, the Goldust character, renews his contract here, and it's reported by Wade Keller that Mankind, his contract is expected to expire later in the summer. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these two guys, because at this point, neither one of them are necessarily main eventers, although they've both been positioned with top guys, whether it was Mankind and Undertaker, or Goldust and Undertaker, or Mankind and Shawn Michaels. How critical were they, and how nervous were you that maybe this Dustin or Mick Foley escape and go to the other side? Because we're in the middle of the Monday Night War. Guys are jumping back and forth. Was there ever a concern that either one of these two guys would leave, or did you feel like, no, their feet are planted here, they've been down there, they've had enough, they're glad to be on this side?
Pretty much the latter scenario that you just mentioned. Mick, the WWF for Mick was always home. Him growing up in Long Island, the great stories of hitchhiking to the Garden to watch Jimmy Snuka come off the top of the cage on Don Morocco. We got the footage of that's been played ad nauseum. But it's a cool story. It's a true story. So I didn't think Mick had any issues. The other thing, Wade Keller reported erroneously that Mick's contract was up in the summer. It was up 18 months later. So we had a year and a half on Mick. And normally I started talking to talents that we wanted to keep that were our priorities about a year in advance. So, but I never thought Mick was going to leave. He was, we were doing those, we did those vignettes with him, that sit down interview thing I did with him, and he loved that. And he's seeing a chance. He had a chance to work on top in the WWF, and that was a huge dream for him. As far as Goldust was concerned, you nailed it. He'd been down to WCW. He'd been there in a couple different incarnations. He worked for his dad. Dusty was the booker. That was a tough drill for him, though, quite frankly, challenging. So I didn't think either of those two cats were going to leave us. But we still had to do our due diligence, communicate with them, make sure they were cool. And we did that. So, and luckily they both stuck around for many years after that.
One of the things I've wanted to ask about was Leif Cassidy, and we know him as Al Snow. And we should mention here that Al Snow just put a new book out, and I highly recommend it for everybody. It's on Amazon or anywhere else you enjoy books, but I read it last week. It's tremendous. I can't put it over enough. But in my research, I found that he gave notice to you guys in this era, but he was notified that, hey, you can't actually give notice. You can only do that at the end of your third year, and you're at the end of your second year. And you guys wanted him to stay, but he's trying to negotiate, I guess, maybe to get out of this deal or position himself differently. When did you realize that Al Snow was unhappy, and why were you guys determined to hang on to him?
Well, Al is a great hand, and Al could make everybody he worked with better because he was that fundamentally sound, which is why now in OVW we see the success that they're beginning to garner there, they're earning there in Louisville. Under Al's watch. He's a great teacher. He has really good instincts. And we felt like we were getting ready to go through a transition period where we had to get younger. We had to change faces. We had to change our lineup. And guys like Al, who are veterans, who had proven themselves in smaller territories and the independent circuit, was a keeper. And, he was like I said, if his work in the ring when it finally faded away, which is a long time to come because he still wrestles, that he would be a great teacher as he's proven out to be. So, but until he said he wanted to leave, he didn't understand that, you can't, he had committed for 3 years and we were paying him for 3 years. And, so we didn't have any desire to break precedent and say, okay, we're going to turn the guy loose a year early just because he wants out, because that would open the door for everybody, to want out. And then, of course, a lot of that times those issues, Conrad, are guys wanting to position themselves for a better money deal. That may have been Al's reason, but he was very much valued. Here we are in the middle of the Major League Baseball season. Al was like a very talented, multi-skill utility player, and those guys are invaluable.
Let's talk a little bit about the news and notes at the time. Wade Keller would report that the front office had made some cutbacks in late May, firing longtime ring announcer Bill Dunn, the former ECW Hype Central host Lance Wright, who I guess had been with you guys for a while, a longtime employee in the art department, and 2 other office workers. And also the duties of George Steele and Jay Strongbow were cut back with only 1 house show per night. They weren't needed as much, but have been kept on board either way. But I guess now, it's sort of nut cutting time for the company. We're not too terribly far away from where Vince would sit down with Bret and say, I can't afford your contract. So this is sort of the first time that it makes the newsletter that, hey, maybe all's not well at the home front financially. Tell me about Bill Dunn. It's a name that I'll admit I didn't immediately recognize.
He was a ring announcer that was been there for a while. When I got there in 1993, Bill Dunn was always overshadowed by Howard Finkel, and rightfully so. Bill, nice guy, did a good job, but the seepage of information on these layoffs came was not a major secret internally. Many of us, I took a big cut in pay. I think it was a $30,000 a year cut in pay.
In 97?
Yeah, right on that, right, maybe right before that. But somewhere in the mid 90s, I didn't try to commit that date to memory because it wasn't something I wanted to recall all the time. But Vince came in and said we're having issues cash flow wise, and I'm asking the wrestling people to take a massive cuts in pay. And I said, okay, what are you offering or what are you suggesting? And he told me, and so I think I got cut to $30,000, I believe, but nonetheless. That's when you go back and we do our research. We'll see that was the week that J.J. Dillon, in a very upset mood, and rightfully so. J.J. had a lot of pressure on him from being a dad of a special needs child, and three young children, and so J.J. couldn't it wasn't going to work for him that you're getting that big cut in pay, so he quit abruptly, and our man Bruce got to be the head of talent relations there for a good while. And I was the senior VP of another wrestling administration, which I think Vince gave me that title. Just thought it would keep me happy. I would have been happy to be Bruce's assistant. I didn't care. I was more concerned about the payday. I'm one of those 2C guys. I knew what the creative was going to be, and I liked the cash, so that's where we were. But it was not a big issue. It was a bad issue for those guys and their families, but it wasn't a secret that the company was hurting, and we had to make changes, and that's why it was so important to get this some new stories established and new talents established, including Stone Cold.
Who has the unenviable task of breaking the news to Strongbow and George Steele? Because it feels
Me. Mm-hmm. I got to do that. It wasn't fun. I was a new kid on the block. I hadn't been there very long. This was 97. I've been there 4 years. Had already been in and out a couple times. And Strongbow was one of Vince's boyhood heroes. So he didn't need to do it. Quite frankly, it's my job. And George, basically the same. I don't think George had the relationship with Vince that Strongbow did. Strongbow had a great rapport with Vince. I remember Strongbow always called Vince Caesar. Oh, Caesar's in a bad mood this week. The wrestlers love this. The wrestlers love to spread bad news. They just do. It's inherent. Have you noticed that?
I have.
Yeah, they love it. Howard Finkel, God bless him. Howard's been on the weather. He's not feeling great, but he used to run them. Anytime there's a death in the wrestling business, it could be in Australia. It's an Australian underneath indie guy. Jim, I got some bad news for you, Howard. I said, of course you do, Howard. Who died this time? Well, have you ever heard of, fill in the blank? No, I hadn't heard. Well, he passed away last night. Okay, Howard, well, let's send him flowers. It's like, so it's just, that's the nature of the beast. It's crazy. It was that way in 1974 when I got into it. They love to talk. Wrestlers are worse than women that watch soap operas in the old day. And now I'm sounding chauvinistic, but most soap operas back in the day, kids, were meant for women, the female viewers. Look at the sponsors. And these ladies took those shows very, very seriously. And I grew up in a household of them. I know this. So that was, the wrestlers are worse. And but it was just a big layoff. We had to get more energy. We had to get more productivity from our coaches or producers or the agents, as they were called at that time. And AEW, they call them coaches. They're all the same job. They help the talents put together their matches, give them direction, coach them up, motivate them, help them to do good. And but not that George and Jim Myers, George Steele, weren't doing that. They were getting older, and they were a little bit limited on what they could do or wanted to do. So the only incumbent, I think, old time agent that we kept was Jack Lanza, and Jack did a real good job all during that Attitude Era. And one of the things that kept Jack on board was the fact that he was a great communicator, former school teacher, had a good education. He communicated with me in the way that I needed him to do. Anything that happened off the record would stay off the record. I got another agent report that was not public, that was just for me. If somebody was a little out of the way or messed up, Jack always gave me the full story. And sometimes it's on the phone because he didn't want to write it down, which I commended. So that was how we worked that deal. And we had to get younger. The coach, we had to get a fire there. We had to start something. And luckily, all those things kind of fell into place with those guys.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was Scott Putski. I know that seems like it's out of left field, but in my research for this show, I saw that you guys were plugging the upcoming debut of Scott Putski, and you're even showing footage of his father, Ivan Putski, and you make sure to call the footage really old, and it's a clip of him beating up Roddy Piper, and you're acknowledging Roddy Piper by name. You're doing this probably as a receipt because the prior week on Nitro, they showed a clip of Ric Flair beating on Vader. Then we see Scott Putski get a win over Leif Cassidy. For whatever reason, it didn't work with Scott Putski. What was the hope and why didn't it work out?
Well, Scott had $1 million look. He had a great name. His father, Joe Bednarski, a.k.a. Ivan Putski, was a big star there. And he's a big star in Mid-South. I knew him from back in the day. So he got over. He got over big time. And, you hope to parlay on that second generation thing. And sometimes it works and sometimes it's not a guarantee. Being a second generation wrestler really doesn't guarantee you anything but that first look. And something for the announcers to talk about when you're on television. Scott seemed like a decent kid, good looking kid, thought he was a nice athlete. he didn't have the it factor. It just did not come natural for him. He could do things athletically extremely well, but I'm not so sure he knew why he was doing them.
Right.
So that was kind of the deal there. Good look. If it was just all about it, 8x10s, he's a main eventer. But it was about more than that, and his skill set just didn't fit that level.
One of the other things I found in my research was on Raw on the way to this show, the Road Warriors would beat PG-13 in under 2 minutes. I should mention that PG-13 were the two white dudes in the Nation of Domination who would come out in hats and glasses and jackets and sort of rap their way to the ring. And they're staples in Memphis. It's JC Ice and Wolfie D. And let me just read the recap. PG-13 cried at first, then charged the ring and pummeled the Warriors with punches. The Warriors didn't sell it at all. And after taking a beating, Wolfie escaped their grasp and tagged in JC Ice. Actually, Hawk grabbed Ice and then threw him into the ring. And then Ice and Wolfie managed to double team Hawk and pile drive him, but he no-sold it. The Warriors then gave their shoulder clothesline finisher to each of them and pinned both simultaneously. PG-13 had asked for help from the NOD, but got none and were abandoned after losing the match. Now, Meltzer would write, PG-13 is gone after the Road Warriors deal. Apparently the guys think it's Jerry Lawler had them fired because they're working opposition to Lawler in Tennessee, although that's been denied internally. They were told there is a chance they'll be brought back for the light heavyweight division, but that would likely be only for television purposes if it happens at all. He would also say JC Ice had gotten a lot of heat in his short tenure there. Chat me up. What happened with PG-13 and why was this the end for them?
I think the short answer to the story and the bottom line of it is that those two kids were certainly not low on talent. We would not have hired them if we didn't think they didn't have talent. But they were not a good fit in the locker room from a cultural standpoint, meaning they didn't know they were young and green, and both of them have been around since they were young kids, and I think they felt that they'd paid all the dues they needed to pay, and I might be wrong about that, but they just didn't fit well in the locker room. They had a hard time getting along with people, and maybe they were not as good as they thought they were, but they certainly did not lack talent. They just lacked maturity. I think that's probably the biggest issue. They didn't have the maturity.
One of the other things that happened on this same episode of Raw, Mankind would bring Paul Bearer out onto the stage. And this is when Paul Bearer's face is wrapped up in bandages because the Undertaker had thrown fire at him the prior week. And Mankind is telling Undertaker he's going to give him one more chance. And this is when Paul Bearer is threatening, it's a secret I made while I was standing over the graveside of your mother and father. Come back or I'll hurt you. At this point, of course, we know the big payoff for this is going to be Kane. At this point, did you already have Kane mapped out? And did you know it would be Glenn Jacobs?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That role was tailor-made for Glenn. It was made for Glenn. You know, I saw Glenn when I was doing some work in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for Jim Cornette's group. It was always a lot of fun. And I didn't make a lot of money there, but I sure as hell had a lot of fun doing it. And traveling the Smoky Mountain roads once every several weeks to do TV. But Glenn was perfect for that role. You know, he was a Unabomber for Cornette, big, athletic, intelligent guy. Of course, he's the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee now, and he's doing a great job. But he was a keeper. I brought him. I brought him to a TV, I believe in either Augusta or Macon or something like that. For WWE taping, and everybody loved him. He was polite, well-spoken, intelligent, and it didn't hurt that he was 6'10" and 300 pounds. So, that role was his.
So at this point, are you guys like drawing sketches in the art department of what it will look like, or do you already have all that mapped out? You're just letting the storyline play out? Because it shows a lot of patience here.
No, we signed him not knowing that would be his final role, you know, because he did the Crazy Diesel thing, and he did Dr. Yankum. And so finally, you're looking around and you're scratching your head. Are you kidding me? We can't find something viable for this big dude to do? Dr. Yankov's never going to draw any. That's sometimes gimmicks are given to talents, and they're just they're career killers. You can't get over this gimmick to the point of being a main event guy. And people say there'll be critics of ours or mine. Well, JR, you can get anybody over, and they can all draw on top if it's done right. If it's done right, okay, good for you. Well, you should start your own company, do everything right, and you'll make a lot of money. It's not that easy. So finally, but Glenn, if looking at Glenn, Kane, and Undertaker, they're both almost identical in size. Maybe a little here, a little that, but essentially you could pass as brothers. Hello, that's what we did. So that's how that worked. But the art department got on I know there's a lot of work on the mask being done because his face was allegedly burnt and all that stuff. It's a good story, and I'm very privileged to say that I think Glenn had 2 masks left, and he gave me one of my restaurants. I still got it. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yep.
Let's talk about Farouk. He's going to be a big player on this pay-per-view. You're positioning him for a world title shot, and you sort of start to set the tone when he's in the ring being interviewed by Vince McMahon. And he's talking about how, there's never been a black man to wear the WWF world title. And there's only been token intercontinental champions like Ahmed Johnson. And he even makes the comment to Vince. He says something like, you don't feel a black man is worthy of being champion of the WWF, but you do think a black man is worthy of washing your car. And he called the Undertaker your white savior. And he says, we are no longer sitting back, and we're going to, get what we want by any means necessary. So this militant stance and maybe teetering on controversy when you're talking about, well, there's never been a black champion, just token champions. Is that Vince Russo pushing for that? Is that Vince McMahon pushing for that? It does feel like a slippery slope creatively.
It is slippery. It was a slippery slope. It was edgy. It was TV 14 material. And in today's world, it would not be probably accepted because of the racial overtones of the topic. At that time, in that era, 1997, a little bit different public climate. It was in the process of a fictional presentation. Of course, we all knew that Farouk was Ron Simmons, 4-time All, and I even said that on that broadcast. He was a legit 4-time football All-American at Florida State. He was a beast as a nose tackle. So you couldn't do that today, as we all know, but then it seemed to work, and everybody was on the same page. Ron had no issue saying it because, quite frankly, one of the things that makes heels great, Conrad, is when they tell you the truth and you don't want to hear it.
Right.
And that's what he did. So, and then of course, Taker was, and Ron and all those cats in the nation were Taker guys, friends, buddies, whatever. So, and Vince wanted to be edgier. So I don't know if it was a Russo just flipped the switch and there it came. It was a combined effort, but certainly it would not be fair to Russo to say that his creativity didn't contribute to that type of presentation.
One of the other things I wanted to talk about on this show is Rob Van Dam, while he's still working for ECW, has a match on this same episode of Raw, and it's against Jeff Hardy. Now, this is before we know the Hardy Boys. Jeff's here working as an independent, as an underneath, as an enhancement worker, whatever you prefer. And Rob Van Dam is positioning himself as like a traitor from ECW who's now competing on Monday Night Raw. And Jerry Lawler is using this to advance his angle, which will ultimately pay off at Hardcore Heaven with a match on an ECW pay-per-view against Tommy Dreamer, where he's saying that this is extremely crappy wrestling and that ECW can't compete with the talents of Rob Van Dam. So he's done there, and now he's Mr. Monday Night. Tell us how this came to be, because at the time, this is pretty groundbreaking that you have another promotion featuring their talent on Monday Night Raw. Well, it is, the one of the things behind the scenes that some people know is that the WWF at the time was subsidizing ECW and helping them keep their doors open. And I know that to be a fact. It's not hearsay because it came out of my budget in the talent relations side.
So, and that was several reasons. You know, I think Vince actually liked Paul. I certainly did. We knew he was a bright mind who was there if we ever needed something somewhere down the road. He was an asset that we wanted to at least, covet to some degree. But the other thing is that we also knew that ECW had some really good talents that, and so many of them were Northeastern guys that they grew up with a WWF background and DNA. So they would be a good fit for us because they would want to come to our company, we thought, and they did. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. And it helps keep the business alive and all kinds of the right reasons. So that was kind of part of that deal. It wasn't like it was a screw job on Paul or anything. You know, it's all planned out. And but I thought Rob Van Dam, I still do. I think he's one of the best performers we ever had. He can do things that were so far ahead of their time. He's so innovative and creative and unique. And the thing a lot of people don't realize about Rob, and you kind of talk about how tough he is. And his movie he did not too long ago, a little documentary, was really good. He talked about his concussions. This son of a gun worked hurt a lot, and he was tougher than a $2 steak without a doubt. So Rob Van Dam was always high on my list of talents, and I'm glad that we got him. You know, it was Rob Van Dam had that ability, that inherent ability, which is a blessing in this business, to connect with his audience because he was being himself, not unlike Steve Austin was being himself, or Shawn Michaels being himself, or Bret Hart. Rob Van Dam was an enhanced version of Rob Van Dam, and people could get that. They didn't think they were being worked. So he was a big time player. Jeff was so young. About that time, I'm guessing, Conrad, Jeff he might have been 17, maybe 18. He and Matt both maybe fibbed on their age when we used them. I brought them in a lot to do TVs. I liked them. Their dad was a mail carrier, single dad, and I loved their story and the fact they made their own wrestling gear, and they're big-time marks, just like me. I always had time for the Hart. He still do. But you could tell Jeff was going to be something special because he, too, connected with the audience. And he had that great face and the great body English and athleticism. So, looking before us right there, we had two guys in the ring. Again, going back to that Al Snow story earlier about wanting to get guys that could work with anybody and make guys better. For a guy like Jeff Hardy to get better, he needed to work with guys like Al Snow, for example. But he and RVD that was a nice night, and Rob got his win, and the people connected with Mr. Monday Night, and they stayed connected for a long time.
Let's talk about the Dustin Rhodes interview that aired here. This era of 97 is a little weird in that you guys are doing like sit down interviews with different talent. Later in the summer, you're going to do this with Mick Foley. Of course, he'll be in character as Mankind, but that's when we'll first learn about Dude Love and all that. But here we're doing it with Dustin Rhodes, and it's a pretty emotional interview. And he's talking about his relationship with his dad, where he's saying, all those years I looked up to you and you were bigger than life. I wanted to be just like you. And there's no one on the planet who can do Goldust as well as I can. And I hope you're proud of me and myself and my family. And I love you, Dad. But they weren't really talking at the time. They'd had a real life falling out. Whose idea was it to, hey, let's put that on TV?
I'm assuming it's Vince's idea. We started getting this more reality-based television storylines, and that was a good one for all the right reasons. Dusty's a world famous Hall of Fame guy, and everybody had great name identity. And the father-son thing was not a work; it's real. So we were kind of fading toward that era of presentation, which is still work today, quite frankly. Reality-based, much like again, we saw Cody and you saw the match finally of Cody and Dustin from Double or Nothing, and they had one hell of a match, I thought. I'm sure you enjoyed it as an old school wrestling fan. How can you not like that match, right? So it was good stuff, and but Vince, that was a Vince deal. Anything that was on TV, Vince either created it or approved it. Nothing passes. Nothing. Oh, when we started to do that, nothing. That never happened. At least in that era, it did not happen. So but it's just reality. And we were trying to figure out if Dustin was going to be a babyface or a heel. My point was always in this thing that whether we tried it or not, I don't think we should have ever tried to do something that would, the homophobia, the backlash of the negativity of him being a heel. Oh, it's not good. Why do you dislike him? Because he may be gay, he may be bisexual. Again, you asked me this on one broadcast, but I didn't know what androgynous was, so I said on TV probably.
Right.
But so we didn't want to go that sexual route wholeheartedly, but it was always going to be there. It's one of those deals where you say, that'd be like me saying, well, here comes Ahmed Johnson. Man, what an African American he is.
Right.
Well, I can kind of see that, JR. He's a black man. Okay. So things like that go without saying. It's like saying Andre's tall. Okay, good job. So that's kind of where we are on that deal. But Dustin had a story to tell, and he wanted to tell it.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to get to.
I think that might be a way, Conrad, for him to make up some lost time. And thankfully, at the end of the day, that all happened.
When did you guys shoot that? Is that shot in Stanford? Is that shot on location? And how far out in advance did you guys discuss what you would talk about? Was there anything as you're going through that where he's like, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about that? Or did you just tape for a long time and then just chop it up in post?
Yeah, we just talked and edited what we needed, what we wanted. And so that way you don't eliminate nothing. You don't stifle any creativity. In the creative process, there's no bad ideas. Obviously, some are much, much better than others. So you let the guy talk. You're as an interviewer, you're prepared to ask the questions, and you know the story. So, but no, we didn't rehearse it. It wasn't rehearsed. You kind of go over what you're going to talk about. We're going to try to start here. We're going to try to go to here. And we want to make these points in between, and then you do it naturally or as organically as you can. And that's kind of what we did there with the Dustin interview, and it worked out well. It was a nice interview.
We finished this episode of Raw with the Hart Foundation coming to the ring. Bret's going to tell Bulldog, Anvil, Owen, and Pillman to return to the dressing room. And then he calls out the gutless little poser, Shawn Michaels, and tells him to get his ass out here. He cuts a promo here saying that, it finally dawned on me the arrogance and attitude and cockiness that is in you is what all these Americans represent. And you think you're better than everybody, and you look down on us. And he compares America to the Roman Empire, and he says it's going to fall because of scum like Shawn Michaels. And he starts to list things like, instead of trying to face him like a man, you're too busy posing for girly magazines and putting tattoos on yourself and earrings in your navel and nose and ears and shaking your ass and making yourself look like a horse's ass. And he said, Shawn Michaels, the biggest thing that bothers me is you didn't have the guts to face me at WrestleMania this year, one-on-one. Chat me up. This promo, how much of this, we hear these days that everybody's given a script. How much of this is just Bret riffing? How much of this is bullet points? And what, if any of it, was approved ahead of time?
I would say, based on my experience there, especially during that tumultuous era, Bret was going to say what Bret wanted to say. And Vince is going to let him by and large. Not that that's an indictment on either side. So my point is that Bret created the interview. He knew what he wanted to say. He was going to take it in a direction that it would make him and his boys, Hart Foundation, heels in in America, and massive, massive baby faces in Canada and the UK. Anywhere that, we find out, Conrad, when you travel, Americans are not loved by everybody.
Right.
Sorry to mention that, folks, but, because we are somewhat arrogant, conceited bastards sometimes, no doubt. And so Americans aren't loved. You could tell that by how Trump was treated in England. The big protests, and people surely got better things to do than protest Donald Trump being in their city, but they seemed like they did. So Bret, they were smart. So in the lower 48, so to speak, they're going to be heels. Didn't have a problem with that. You get an ass over 18 inches, you make more money. Outside the U.S., they're going to be baby faces because they are saying the truth about how many Americans are. So it worked out pretty well. That's a Bret interview there all the way around, and it certainly was not written. He certainly did not memorize it. Now, I'm sure that as any good performer will do, he'll have bullet points. He'll either write them down himself, which most will do, just to have some sort of rule of thumb, a direction, or he will just make mental notes if you're that good. And but you got to have some structure. But I don't think it was written at all. I don't think he's memorized it. I think it came from his heart. He followed the direction of where they were going in their story, and where he was going with the Hart Foundation. But it was a riveting promo, way ahead of his time, I thought.
Well, Shawn Michaels disagrees, because the idea is Bret's supposed to stand up out of his wheelchair and Shawn's going to super kick him, and then the show goes off the air. But Bret keeps talking, and then by the time he finally stands up and gets the super kick, the show's off the air. They've already missed it. And Bret wrote about this, and he says the fan noise was so loud that he couldn't hear his cue. And instead of the show ending the way it was supposed to, it ended with him still berating Shawn, and Shawn just standing there and doing nothing about it. And Shawn backstage thinks he's done it on purpose and is furious. What do you remember about the backstage temperament when Shawn comes back and realizes, hey, none of that shit made air?
Well, I was out front, so I didn't see it with my own eyes. So I heard enough about it. Again, wrestlers and people that agents and guys, those guys are in talent relations side of my world. Couldn't wait to come tell me everything, and embellish, of course. Shawn thought it was a screw job. He'd been set up, but I am a firm believer to this very day that was not the case. I know it was noisy. Bret was very believable on the mic and did some great promos from time to time without a doubt. But to say that his promos with the strength of his game would not be accurate, because with the strength of his game was wrestling bell to bell, in my opinion. So he missed his cue, and he didn't get his last line in, apparently, that he wanted to get in. And so they always have to have a cue. So tell me when you're going to do this, or tell me when you're going to do that. What's your last line? And so they worked that out. He worked that out with a truck or through the gorilla position. He didn't get there, and we went off the air. But, it aired the next week, so it wasn't like oh, my God, we lost it forever. But I never believed that Bret would sabotage the angle. It's just not his style. It really isn't. But, of course, he was made to look like the bad guy, and Shawn had a lot of people, I'm sure, in his ear chirping that, Bret just screwed you. And are you guys that stupid? The camera's rolling. We got this kick you kicked him right out of this wheelchair. It was a great move. It was a great heel move. Or a babyface move in the States, I guess, but it certainly made Shawn a heel everywhere else. So I never thought that was a conspiracy. I just thought it was oversight, human error, quite frankly. It's not as exotic a story to tell, but I think that's what happened.
Yeah. Meltzer would freestyle that maybe some friends are in his ear being Shawn, trying to get him riled up. And as a result, the next week, Shawn shows up at Raw in Mobile, and according to the Observer, appears to be in no condition to perform. When he was on TV, he's slurring his words badly and makes a remark that Bret was having some sunny days. And that, of course, is something everybody starts talking about. When did you realize, hey, this is a problem?
When he started talking, he sounded like he was slurring, so he either was extremely fatigued or he was medicated. I sensed the latter. And, but that was part of these issues. Shawn was in a very, dark place at that point in time in his life for whatever reason. And there's probably plenty of good reasons. But the bottom line was he was not conducting himself as he does today. And he needed to change to something. Obviously a better lifestyle would have been one thing, but, I don't know. I felt bad for him. I love this kid. I went down to San Antonio and talking to come back into business after he'd been gone 4 years. It took him 4 years to get over his issues. Basically, bad back, medicines, maybe some booze, attitude, big time attitude issues, personal life. But, it was just sad to see where he was headed, because if he had not, and look, you got to give McMahon credit too. Shawn's making $750,000 a year. Now you do that, divide that by 52, and you get how much he's making a week. It's pretty good money. He got that check every week, every day, every week of every year that he was under contract, and while he was sitting at home in San Antonio. Didn't have to happen, but that's how Vince did it. And Vince always had a soft spot for Shawn, because he saw Shawn's rebellious, anti-establishment attitude as reminiscent of a young Vince. And now he had to navigate the waters of the old WWF when his dad owned it. And so I think there's something to be said about that. So Shawn was he was really going down a real bad road, and luckily he changed his direction before it got too late.
Let's before we get down the rabbit hole of what happened next, I guess we should talk about the climate in wrestling at the time, because it does feel like you guys start to get a little bit more attention in the mainstream media. The Baltimore Sun, for example, is talking about how, since the WWF is playing catch-up ball, it feels like they're countering with sex, violence, crude language, and blood. Would you disagree with that?
Well, I wouldn't totally disagree with it, because it's not totally untrue. The choice of, violence is controlled violence. So I don't know. It's not the traditional violence. Those are Kevin Eck. I actually went to work for WWE not too, after that, and the creative side. And he does a lot of work now for Danny McDevitt in Maryland Championship Wrestling. Smart guy. But the language is always, some of that language that you use in describing it, crude language. Okay. This part was crude. Blood is not new. But yeah, we went to some extremes. We got a little bit, we got more physical. With boys started working a little bit more intense. It was a good physical style. And sometimes you have, broken noses and things of that nature that come along. But no, I don't think Kevin's totally wrong on that. I might not use the same words, but the bottom line is they meant the same. So yeah, he's pretty much spot on.
Let's keep it moving here and talk about Michinoku Pro Wrestling. You guys are trying to work a deal out here. According to the Observer, he's saying there's nothing new on the relations with AAA. It looks like you guys had a pretty successful event at Royal Rumble, but now maybe it doesn't feel like there's going to be anything progress there. Talk to us a little bit about the relationship with Michinoku Pro and AAA, and how all of a sudden those became a thing where for years and years, it almost felt like the WWF ignored everybody.
Well, we had to start rethinking everything, Conrad, and that's, sometimes in any business, you have to just step back and reevaluate, hit the reset button to some degree in some areas of what you're doing. We believe that our brand was going to be very global. We wanted to get more diversity on it. We wanted to do some more work and develop a junior heavyweight, light heavyweight, whatever, cruiserweight, whatever word you want to give it, division. And we knew that there are a lot of really good young talents out there that were not giants, that we could be very entertaining on our television programming. So and Victor Quinones, who was real close to Gorilla Monsoon back in the day in Puerto Rico and so forth. Victor was our liaison between AAA and Michinoku Pro. So that's when we brought in Kai and Ty, those four fellas. Hell, and I'm trying to think of his name. I see it's Sho Funaki hasn't left yet. He's still here in the States. I think he's got to be a citizen by now, for God's sakes. I know he's a big Dallas, and he's a Green Bay Packer fan. You can see that on Facebook. So those guys, just depth. We got some new talents, could do some new things with them. And of course, in our stupid society, because everybody certainly vividly remembers December 7th, 1941, all the Asians were or villains in that era. It's kind of hilarious when you start to think about it. Sad hilarity. But nonetheless, that's why we got it. We're going to expand our roster, add some Japanese element, get some guys that have a little different style, and Victor brokered that deal. So we brought those four cats in, and one of the best names of all, one of the best wrestling names ever, Dick to Go. Dick Togo. Dick to go.
Let's talk a little bit about your good friend, Paul Bear.
Mm-hmm.
He's no longer with us, but May 17th, he is featured in his hometown newspaper, the Mobile Register, and they're putting him over huge. And talking a little bit about his background in wrestling. I don't know that we have spent enough time in wrestling really talking about who Paul Bear really was. Before we just sort of keep it moving here, I just wanted to give you a minute to sort of talk about the man behind the character.
Big George Jones fan, biggest George Jones fan in the world. On one of the big ribs one time, was somebody might have been Owen, went to him and said that he just heard that George Jones had been killed in a car wreck, and he didn't realize how serious that information was to Paul Bear. It was devastating, and so the rib really blew up in the wrong way, and Owen had to apologize, and only kidding, and I don't know that Paul Bear ever forgave him to give him that rib about George Jones. He was a real mortician. He was an Air Force veteran, United States Air Force. He was not always 300 pounds. He did some wrestling. He did some managing, and he was a regular on the weekly shows there in Mobile, in that old territory. He worked a lot in Dallas for Fred Spont to the Von Erichs. He worked for my friend Dennis Brent for sometimes, and Dennis's company as well. Just a really good dude, man. He is a great historian, dearly loved the business, and getting to play that mortician, which he really was, with Undertaker, was a match made in heaven. It really was. He was just a super guy, and I remember I paid for my budget. I didn't pay for, you know what I mean, out of my budget for that gastric surgery to help him lose weight, because he was going to wasn't going to be a long life, and I think we extended his life, but not long enough. Obviously, he left us too early. But we did the surgery, the lap band thing, or whatever the hell it was. I don't remember exactly the name of the procedure, but to help him lose some weight, it kind of resurrected his career a little bit, because he had gotten so heavy. His health was just going to hell, and but a sweetheart of a guy, Conrad, really good guy, a credit to the business without a doubt.
One of the best, and I hope we get to talk about him long form sometime. If you guys are into it, we'll try to make it happen. Let's talk about the May 19th Raw. We briefly talked about, the whole Sunny Days promo, and that really sort of takes over the show, and it becomes what everybody is talking about. Did you think that, it's weird because I don't think anybody knew how this would shake out. Obviously nobody could have predicted Montreal, but with Bret and him being injured, did you think, any part of you think, because the original plan, if I have this correct, was that Bret and Shawn were going to do something at King of the Ring. And then when Bret's injured, that changes. And so they pivot, and we're going to talk about what they did. Did you think at all that maybe Bret, I don't know, was sandbagging? Maybe he could go, but didn't want to, and thought maybe now's not the time, or I don't want to go in there against a guy I don't really trust and not be at my best. I'm not saying that he was faking the injury, but maybe if it was somebody else, he would have tried to power through, but because it's Shawn, he doesn't want anybody saying, "Oh, Bret gave me a bad match," or whatever.
No, I think that Bret would not have taken that route if he was 100% healthy. Because he was very mentally tough, very mentally tough. And he would not have backed away from the challenge. And it was a challenge for Bret to deal with Shawn and Shawn to deal with Bret, and for them to coexist as professionals. It was challenging. Everybody knows it was challenging. We know they had fights. We know that they had the thing in Montreal, et cetera, et cetera. But they had a legitimate rivalry. They apparently, at the end of the day, just despised each other. So, but I never thought Bret would walk away and upset the company and the plans of the company to draw money, which everybody in his locker room shared in. I didn't think he was that kind of guy, and I still don't think he's that kind of guy. So I don't believe in the Bret Hart conspiracy that he plotted to sabotage the angle. I'm not going to buy that one.
Let's keep it moving here. And you do a sit down in this next episode where you're sitting down with Mankind and you're talking about him growing up and the whole plate of worms. Is this done the same way with Goldust? And why was the decision made to say, hey, you know what? These Goldust ones went well. Let's do it now for Foley. Why was he the right guy to go to next with this format?
Mick had a great story to tell, and we had footage. He had unique footage. We had that footage I mentioned earlier about Snuka coming off the cage in Madison Square Garden. We had footage of Mick wrestling as a teenager and jumping off the roof of his house or something into a mattress. We had some classic old footage that helped tell our story. And Mick was an amazing storyteller. This is before he'd written any of his books. And I think that some of the motivation, I should say, for him to write that first book was came out of some of those interviews that we did, because they got over so big, him just telling stories of his life. You know, the story about playing lacrosse without a cup and getting hit in the gonads with a lacrosse ball or where the hell they are. And you know, he's a funny guy, and his stories are real and they're relatable. So, you know, like he said, the only time that girls ever noticed his growing was his testicles are the size of grapefruits, and from that injury. So, but he just had a great story to tell, Conrad, and we needed to tell that story because we didn't really know if Mick was going to be fish or foul. His story down there made him a babyface because fans could relate to almost every step of his journey. But we didn't need him to be a babyface in the early going. We needed him to be a guy that we could put with Undertaker. That's why I hired him. Undertaker needed heels, and Mick's 6'4" and 300 pounds, and he could match up well. And both those guys liked each other from previous territories in Dallas and in Atlanta. So that was the deal. He just had a great story to tell, and we felt like we were compelled to tell it. And we had no script. We did that in a little studio on 120 Hamilton in Stanford. We had our crew there, and I noticed that as the night progressed, we did it after work. As the night progressed, we had more and more people hanging around. That usually meant one of two things. One, they're waiting on some really good catering, or they are really enthralled in what they're hearing. And so then all of a sudden we're doing this interview, I think we get to a point to take a break, a pee break or something, maybe to eat, I'm not sure. And all of a sudden I hear Vince's voice in the darkness, because, you know, the lights are on us. We can't see past the lights. And I remember what he said, you know, he put it over like, damn, this is good shit, boys. This is good shit, you know, something like that. And that was what's for a guy like Mick and myself, that was great validation. He couldn't have said anything better. And he never interjected his creativity. He never told us what to say. He never told those guys what to edit out. He just let it roll. So we just had that long conversation. The only thing we knew we were going to do at the end was I was going to get the mandible claw. And my only thought process was I going to get the shooting mandible claw or the working mandible claw. You know what the difference is, Conrad?
I don't.
All right. The shooting mandible claw is where he puts his two fingers in your mouth under your tongue and squeezes with his thumb under your chin. The working mandible claw is where he takes those same two fingers and bends them over in half, and it looks like they're in your mouth, but they're not. Luckily for me, I got the working mandible claw, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but that's how we were going to end it. But that's how we constructed our interview. That's why so many fans are saying it's going to be great for AEW, because they're not going to have writers to write these promos to these guys and tell them what to say. They're going to let the talent say what they want, as long as it's got some sort of structure, i.e. an outline of bullet points. That's what it's going to be. So that's great. But that interview was not written by anybody. No writers, no creative people were involved in it. In that respect, it was just Mick and I. Now, everybody knew the story we were going to tell, but you know, nobody wrote a script. I'm trying to say there's no teleprompter, no nothing like that. So we had it just clicked. I had good chemistry with Mick. I believed in his story. I knew his story thoroughly. You know, I had to go to the wall to hire him, and all of a sudden, you know, Vince standing there and saying, "This is good shit." I think it also gave Mick a great deal of confidence that Vince finally recognized that Mick Foley had a lot of talent.
I want to give a special shout out to Manscaped. Fellas, blink if you haven't purchased a Father's Day gift yet. Yeah, we thought so. Today's episode is brought to you by Manscaped, the leaders in below the waist grooming. Maybe your pops has had a bush since the 70s. Well, that's okay. Our friends at Manscaped have crafted the total package for his special day. Whether it's for the boys downstairs, his beard, or even the best pair of underwear out there, Manscaped has all of Dad's bases covered. Head on over right now to manscaped.com and get 20% off plus free shipping with the code Jim Ross. From daddy to zaddy, trust Manscaped. Hey, you know that beard trimmer your dad's been using since you were in second grade? Well, it probably needs upgrading, and that's why we think Dad will love the Beard Hedger Pro Kit. It's the complete beard maintenance kit for all of our bearded kings, and the all-in-one kit comes with a beard hedger, Manscaped's most advanced beard trimmer, as well as the shampoo, the conditioner, the oil, and the balm that he needs for his beard. It also comes with a brush, a comb, and scissors, so he can style his beard and mustache like a true gentleman. And how about this? No kit would be complete without the handyman face shaver. It's the smooth finish that we know he loves, and this bad boy is all he needs. It's compact enough to fit in any travel case, so make sure Dad takes it on his next trip. But if he's carrying a lot of body hair, like most dads do, be sure to recommend the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. I really love this one, and I've given this a lot, and a lot of times people think it's a gag gift, and then they try it, and they love it. But if you're looking for a gift that's going to get everybody's attention, everybody's going to give it a chuckle, then they're really going to love it. Look no further than the Lawnmower 5.0. They also can take care of Dad's nail problem. Yeah, the Shears 3.0. It's a 5-piece Precision's men's nail grooming kit. It's everything Dad needs to stay on top of that look and feel. Mom doesn't like long fingernails either. How about the professional grade stainless steel tools here? They look cool. They feel substantial in your hand, and they've even got underwear covered for you. The Manscaped Boxers 2.0 have the jewel pouch. It's a dedicated space that cradles your stones. Go take a look and tell me your dad won't chuckle, and then love these products. Get yourself 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use our code Jim Ross. Never forget where you came from, if you know what I mean. Happy Father's Day from Manscaped.
Let's keep it moving here because I want to move on from the interview, but I feel like I have to ask when you're telling the sympathetic story about, you know, the kids were making me worms and all that, but then you finish with, and that makes you feel like, okay, he's going to be a sympathetic babyface. We're going to turn him babyface. But then he puts the mandible claw on good old JR. This is not traditional wrestling. This is shades of gray. It's not just standard good guys and bad guys, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a real story, and it just showed his unpredictability, that sometimes he had aggressive urges that could not be controlled, that he could not restrain himself from perpetrating. That's kind of how we looked at that thing. And so he's always got that unpredictable aura about him. And, that's kind of where we are. And of course, we knew that nobody wanted to be a star in WWE more than Mick Foley, for God's sakes. And apparently he would do anything to achieve that goal, because he's done everything to get here, including lose a half a ear, and his head's all scarred up, and arms are scarred, and he's walking crooked, and all that good stuff. Losing teeth. He paid a lot of prices, as obvious by this his physical appearance. So you kind of we just told the whole story, and then you let the audience decide if they like him, or I don't know if I like this guy or not. I don't know if I can trust him or not. So we just let it play out, and then you let the audience make their own call. Did you like it, or did you not like it? Is he a babyface? Is he a heel? And the audience should be able to decide that themselves.
We should mention here, because I do want to put a bow on this Bret thing for a minute. After the Sunny Days comment, he talks about in his book how, Julie, his wife, and Stu are upset. And then people at school are starting to sort of mess with his kids a little bit about the Sunny Days comment, and you have to call and apologize. And as a result, Bret would write in his book, throughout that week, I brooded about what to do. I wondered about beating the hell out of Shawn for real at the pay-per-view, but that could be costly to the company if he got badly hurt, and I had to be careful of my knee. I decided to tell Vince that I had to pull out of the pay-per-view because my knee wasn't ready, And Vince already had a plan. Stone Cold would catch me alone, flatten me, and bash the hell out of me, taking me out of the pay-per-view storyline. And that would be a clean win for Shawn, and what would have been a clean win for Shawn. We should remember that Bret had this arthroscopic knee surgery done on April 23rd. And we've set a stipulation here on this episode of Monday Night Raw on the 19th, that if he doesn't beat Shawn in 10 minutes, he'll never wrestle in the United States again. So it's over. Did you think at that point, we may never get this match? These guys are so sideways with each other, or did you think eventually it would happen?
Oh, I thought eventually it definitely would happen, without a doubt. Too much work had gone into it. They both knew that the one thing about that override their personal issues, Conrad, is from a professional standpoint, ego standpoint, is that they love having great matches. And nobody can deny that when those two cats are on with each other, they made great magic, great music, no doubt. So, yeah, I thought it would eventually happen. I just didn't know when or where or what shape it's going to take, but there's too much invested to not make it happen. And I knew that Bret was going to do all he could to get that stuff rolling, get back in the ring. He just had to restrain himself as best he could from doing what he said he was going to do, and that was beat up Shawn. Because, Shawn had crossed the line in the family thing, and that was not good, and it embarrassed Bret and his family, and that was certainly not cool. And so it got just another log on the fire, man, just another log on the fire. But I did think at the end of the day, we would finally get to see some sort of conclusion to the storyline, because both guys are too old school, too much of a traditionalist to let the angle just evaporate and go away without a conclusion.
Let's keep it moving here. I guess we should mention that Raw did a 3.6. It's the highest rating of the year for Raw. When a rating comes in like that, maybe it doesn't win, but it's the highest rating of the year for you guys. You got to feel like, okay, we're doing something right? Or is it high fives all around, or is it just business as usual?
Well, there was some obviously minuscule celebrating that we had our best number in a while. But golly, you're just. I used to tell people this all the time. They said, "Did you get depressed in those 83 weeks that Bischoff's crew beat your ass?" And I said, "No, not really. I didn't have time to get depressed because I had work to do, and we had, and some days we had another show to do that week or another pay-per-view to do that week, whatever. So there was no time for celebrating and no time for, boo-hooing it. But yeah, there was some. Hey, we thought we were onto something, Conrad, with the reality-based storytelling. Reality-based storytelling that the fans could actually sink their teeth into, and not have to try to buy some silly character that was all it was is a comedic thing and an eye roller. So we thought we were onto something trend-wise that we should continue to travel. This road should be reality-based, and we did that as best we could. And the talents we had at that time were perfect for that scenario, and they loved living those stories out and embellishing on the reality of their lives and their issues.
It's a fun time to be a wrestling fan. How do you find out that the match with Shawn and Bret is off? And what'd you think of the pivot to do Shawn and Austin?
Well, Vince told me after Bret talked to Shawn, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that after Bret had his conversation with Vince, of course, I'm sure within minutes of Vince hanging up the phone, that he had me in his office, and he had an idea. He said, "I'm going to go with Austin," and that to me was magic, because I was an Austin mark. I still am. Steve's a good friend, still is. I just saw something and felt something that I had not seen replicated in years. There was one period of time in Louisiana, in the Mid-South Territory, where JYD was white hot, and he could do no wrong, and he sold massive amounts of tickets and so forth, and people believed in him. They seemed to gravitate to him. Black people, white people, men, women, adults, children. I didn't know if the children were going to be too crazy about Austin because of his demeanor, But boy, the guys, our primary demo of males, 18 to 34 and 18 to 49, loved his ass big time. So when Vince said, I'm going to go with Austin, number one, I knew that Austin and Shawn would have a hell of a match. And the fact that it gives Austin some great TV exposure in building that brand of his, that it was the right thing to do. So it was a good call. It was the best call we could make, quite frankly. And it worked out pretty good for everybody involved. But I think Brett's knee was not good. And look, hey, you asked earlier, if this was somebody else other than Shawn, and it was really a big thing, and could Bret have worked? Probably he might have been able to work. But I just don't think he sandbagged it, but it worked out pretty good. That show ended up being a pretty damn good pay-per-view.
Let's talk about the situation with Shawn Michaels. Meltzer, he was not kind to Shawn Michaels in this era. He would say, but the situation with Michaels over the past few weeks has gone far deeper than making shoot comments after being told not to, slurring his words on live television, wearing a bandana on his head to signify to the television world he's still best friends with Kevin Nash, complaining backstage about having to do an interview with putting Ken Shamrock over, or even walking out on the company the day he was supposed to drop his title and not returning until after the WrestleMania that he was supposed to return the favor from the biggest victory of his career, thereby screwing up nearly one promotion and being a key factor in the show, doing a poor buy rate, and the company being down literally millions of dollars in revenue from its biggest show of the year. He says, Meltzer would go on to say, that he is ill-equipped emotionally to handle the spot that he's been given. And that came out again in recent weeks when he became at odds with Vince, when he demanded a new contract, one that would put his pay at the same level as his rival. And of course, we're talking about Bret Hart there. And when McMahon turns down his demands, he gives his notice saying he wants to join his real friends in WCW, but he's got 4 years left on the deal. So McMahon refuses.
Goes back to that Lee Cassidy situation we talked about earlier. You can't let guys go and just walk in their contract when they feel like they want to leave.
Did you feel like this feels common? I mean, you can tell just by the way Dave says this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And then he even says, and I want your take on this, ill-equipped emotionally to handle the spot his talent has gotten him. Do you agree with that assessment?
At that time he was, because again, you make a lot of decisions under stress, depression sets in on a lot of things for these performers. And then you add either drugs and or alcohol abuse, self-medicating, prescription meds, all this other crap. So under those terms, Meltzer was probably right under those circumstances. Now, eventually that would be cleared up and he would be fine. He's very valuable to WWE now. Shawn is in the Performance Center. But yeah, he wasn't ready. He lost his buddies. It just was a whole slew of things. And again, I don't know how his home life was. I don't think it was great. He had not married. He had not married his current wife at that time, I don't believe, which she made a big, big difference in his life. And luckily for him, because we would be talking about him posthumously if he had not met her, in my opinion, and she helped change his life. He had major issues. Now, all that said, he still, along with the Nate, was the two best in-ring workers I ever saw. So he stayed, and even when we brought him back after a 4-year hiatus, he comes back his first night in, and he's as good as anybody we've got, if not better. So he was special in a lot of ways, but he was not nearly able to handle his issues outside the ring as he was to be able to go bell to bell with anybody.
So when you hear, hey, there's an issue with Bret, I mean, do you hear that from Vince and does everybody in the meeting sort of go, oh, fuck, not this again?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think we all knew that the possibility of Bret not having the match because of his injury was there.
No, I mean, in terms of with Shawn, like Shawn wants to be paid like Bret. And it's like, another fucking Shawn Michaels is upset about Bret deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It got old. Well, the other thing is that you don't tear up contracts with 4 years left on them.
Right.
That's not bad. That's bad business, and it's not very smart to even ask somebody that question. He's making great money, and of course he's talking to Kevin and Scott, and they're telling him how great things are. They're doing it where they want. They run their own show. They do their own program, which Eric might disagree with. I don't know, but that they're going to paint a very rosy picture to try to get Shawn to come down there with them, and that wasn't going to happen. There was no way in hell. It ain't going to happen for 4 years. I tell you that. So hold your breath. Don't hold your breath.
It's written in the
Observer.
You
get tired of it. You get tired of anybody doing that. It's like I said. People think I'm oversimplifying shit. It's always about cash and creative.
It was written in the Observer that Shawn was making roughly $750, and that's his downside. And he signed a 5-year deal after WrestleMania 12 when he won the world title, or maybe right before. But it's a 5-year deal around WrestleMania 12 with a downside of $750. Does that sound like it's in the ballpark?
Oh yeah, it's accurate. He got $750 because, again, that's my budget at that time. And all, as I said earlier, Vince took care of Shawn because he felt a kinship to the son of a gun, and he loved that. I don't know, his demeanor, in a lot of ways, because it reminded Vince of Vince when young Vince. So I don't know if that's bragging or complaining. I don't have a clue, but nonetheless, Shawn was making $750. He made $750 a week for 4 years. And all that time he was home, like I said earlier, he was making $750,000 a year. That's a lot of money to not do nothing.
Let's talk about something that happened the next week on Raw. This has been something that's floated around on the internet in these last few years. Obviously things are different. Times were different. You addressed it earlier when we talked about the racial promo from Farouk. Mm-hmm. Jerry Lawler comes out and cuts a promo on Goldust trying to hype their match. And he says something like, Goldust's old man, Old Dust, doesn't even love him anymore. Well, I know Dusty Rhodes, and he told me why. It's because you married the biggest gold digger in Georgia and then put on a woman's wig and went around kissing men like a flaming F-word. And then regarding Dakota, Lawler said, you should have named that little brat Target because I heard everybody in Atlanta had a shot at it.
Oh, that's classic. Well, that was not written for him.
It's an edgy promo, in the era where, things were over the edge. This got everybody's attention. It is something that you would almost hear on like a roast battle or something like that. There's lots of low blows, but it is making Goldust that sympathetic baby face, which was maybe the idea with the interview the previous week. But does anybody say, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea. Obviously talking about Old Dust and that's whatever, but then to say the F word and then to reference the child, maybe in hindsight, not the best idea.
Maybe, good point. You got to remember the talents, when they saw that the blinders are off and the bits are out of their mouth, they were able to run free. Most of them will take it as far as they can. And Lawler getting the word that, hey, we want to be on edge here, and you're a heel, blah, blah, blah. People forget how great a heel Jerry Lawler was and an amazing talker. During that time, like I said, I watched the pay-per-view this week. I watched it on Tuesday, and his work leading into that and that night was classic. Any young wrestler that's watching that wants to be a heel and wants to know fundamental soundness and logic of being a great heel should watch the events that we're talking about here today and watch how Lawler navigated that thing. Now, he wasn't no young kid at that time. He was a veteran. He didn't lose a step. It was all about psychology and positioning. It was as good as you'll see. So it's like a clinic on how to be a wrestling heel. Not a Bruiser Brody heel or Abdullah the Butcher heel, the monster heel, because Lawler's not a monster heel. He's a wrestling heel. And you get a great example of what a wrestling heel really is if you watch that show and watch his mannerisms, his timing. He sells differently as a heel than he does as a babyface. He has it down to a science. But he went into business for himself. Could have certainly been argued that it was a little bit too edgy. And I don't condone talking about children or religion or sexual preferences or any of that stuff. Politics and religion and that stuff don't belong in wrestling to me. But we didn't have any rules, and he took it as far as he could go. And then Vince would tell those guys, "Well, go see what you got, and then we got to reel you in. We'll reel you in next time." So that's kind of what it was.
Let's talk about the Dude Love footage, because that's aired in part 2 of your Mankind interview. When did you guys know you had this Dude Love footage? How does it even come up where you see footage of a young Mick Foley jumping off the roof of his house and cutting promos? I mean, does he say, "Hey, I've got this"? How does that come about?
And Mick provided us those old home movies, and that's where we discovered Dude Love, and Mick's suicidal nature, high risk, high reward type thing. But Mick provided the home movies, and we found it's like finding these hidden gems in the NFL films vault. It was just classic stuff that we had to use it. We had to figure out a way to use it, and those interviews that Mick and I did was the vehicle that we chose.
One of the things that happened on this show, and it happened a lot in this era, especially after WrestleMania 13, was we would see Sable modeling stuff, whether it was an Undertaker shirt or an Austin 316 shirt. Here she's modeling the inflatable King of the Ring chair, which is a $59 item plus $11 shipping and handling. Yes, but you guys were surprised when you would see the ratings come in, and holy cow, Sable's popping a number, and all she's doing is walking down the ramp in a t-shirt, right?
Damn right. And she did it very well. She did it very, very well. And of course, those t-shirts are always like double mediums or something she wore. They were very form fitting, shall we say. And she had a very nice form for them to fit. No different, just like we talked about on the show before, Connie, when Vince and I interviewed Mark Marrow and and his wife, Rena, came along for the meeting. And then we go back and he calls me in a few minutes. "Did you see what I saw?" "Yeah, I sure did." Goddamn, JR. Well, so she had it, man. The sex appeal, the look, the walk, the stature, the eyes, the smile, the little smirk. She knew she was in control. And the great stars, they used to say the same thing about the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, that he could leave when he left the dressing room and he walked out, that great tan and his nice robes and stuff, and some people would cheer him because he looked like a real pro, but with his sneers and his arrogance and his walk, by the time he got into the ring, they hated him. And that's a true story. And Rena, you could tell she was the same way on the opposite. She walked the aisle, does her selling job, or Vanna White. Man, can you imagine her on Vanna White? Vanna White's job would have been in jeopardy if Rena had been coming along in that role. But she did very well. And that's where the minute by minute ratings, again, influence creative. And I think that's probably a smart thing. The audience has always responded to her. It was documented. So she should be doing something more than modeling a t-shirt.
Well, I'll tell you, a t-shirt, was the topic in the office after these Mankind promos air. These sit down interviews with you air. Keller would write that the sales on those shirts for Mankind go up 300%. Talk about building a baby face, right?
Yep. I appreciate all that money I got from those shirts. Nothing, not a damn thing. No, I'm good. It worked. That was a part of the whole process of building that character. Is you going to be a baby face or a heel? We knew what we wanted initially, but we knew that we had more because we had 3 layers. We knew Cactus Jack was a character that Vince didn't want to use in the beginning. So he helped invent Mankind with the mask and whole 9 yards. That was Vince's deal. Because he wanted to create something new, a WWF version of Mick Foley. And so then Dude Love came along in a home movie. So we know we got Cactus Jack. Now we got Mankind. And who's this Dude Love dude? Dude Love dude. So we got 3 guys there. Hell, we got 3 T-shirts. We got 3 main events. We got all kinds of ways to go with this thing. And it established Mick having more security. because he had a lot of diversity. He could help us in a lot of ways. Babyface, heel, one of 3 characters, and he was always so reliable. So it was a marriage made in heaven for us as far as how Mick evolved in those 3 roles. We got lucky.
Let's keep it moving here. I want to talk about the match where Shawn Michaels is going to team up with Steve Austin. They become reluctant partners. You know, Austin had teased that he was going to use Harvey Whippleman or Brooklyn Brawler. Eventually it becomes Shawn. Shawn is making it clear, nobody likes me around here. I don't know if you want to do that. And he is successful in his quest to become tag champion with Steve Austin. They beat Owen and Bulldog here. And you push on commentary that this is Shawn's first match in 4 months. Austin's going to get the 3 count. Afterwards, of course, the entire Hart Foundation jumps on Shawn Michaels, and Austin looks on, walks past them, and instead goes after Bret Hart at the top of the runway. And of course that leads Bulldog and Owen in to make the save. Something happened in that match though. Wade Keller would report that Shawn slide kicked Austin in the match by mistake as part of the angle. And Michaels actually accidentally damages Austin's neck. Austin apparently felt a sharp pain after the impact, and his leg buckles. And you can actually see that on the tape. And he, as a result, is going to go see a few different doctors. They're saying there's no major damage, but the MRI is showing that he has the neck of a 60-year-old. And this is ahead of SummerSlam 97. When you heard, hey, maybe Austin suffered an injury here in this match with Shawn, does this just feel like a snake bit pay-per-view on our march there?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Luckily first let's clarify, it was a spot in the match that these 2 guys had called, but just the execution of it and the way where Steve was standing and how Shawn kicked him, all the stars aligned, unfortunately on that one. I know that Steve found a great neurologist, neck guy in San Antonio named, I think his name is Lloyd Youngblood. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Youngblood's eventually did the surgery on the Steve. But it was a delicate situation. All those years of football, he was a tailback in high school, and he carried the ball 25, 30 times a game, and most of it straight ahead. Lower your head and go. So you don't know how many equipment as it was at that time. So football probably had a issue in his neck issues. Then he went to North Texas for the Mean Green and played defensive end, also striking people with his head and using his neck again. Then wrestling. And then, everybody was just free willy these chair shots. My God, it got to be where the boys were like, who could make the loudest noise, who could hit the hardest.
Right.
It was sad, man. We just kept condoning it. It was just not knowing all the repercussions of the long-term effects of CTE and all those things. So, we just held our breath, because anybody that had any sense that didn't have a dog in the hunt, like a buddy who Steve was passing up on the roster, could see that he's the next big thing. And we wanted to keep him healthy as hell for a lot of reasons, not just that, but it was dicey, really, really dicey, because we had big plans for Steve. And of course that kind of went out the poop chute at SummerSlam that year against Owen.
Let's talk about the last segment on this particular Raw. We're still trying to pay off this Undertaker Paul Bearer secret. It looks like it's finally going to come out. Undertaker then grabs Bear by the throat. And then after this long, awkward pause, he kneels at Bear's feet and, seemingly submitting, I guess, that he doesn't want this secret to come out. And the show comes to a close. Nitro does a 3.2. Raw does a 2.78. Let's fast forward. Bret wrote in his book, on June 2nd, I had an in-depth talk with Vince McMahon. He told me the company was in financial peril and that he was only just barely hanging on. The next 6 months are either going to make or break him. He said Ted Turner was hell-bent on putting him out of business, and he told me he might have no choice other than to restructure my contract. Of course, I'd still get every dime he owed, but I'd get it on the back end years down the road. He added that he appreciated how hard I was working for him, and he told me not to worry about anything. I sure didn't want to receive the money owed to me now at the back of my contract. So I did call my lawyer to see what my options were if Vince tried to do that kind of a move. But when it came down to it, I don't believe that he ever would do that. Does Vince have a talk with, I mean, you're making budgets. So does he sit down with you and say, Jim, what can we do? What are the suggestions? Or does he bring it to you and say, looking at this, I think we've got to restructure Bret? And do y'all have a conversation ahead of that conversation, or do you find out about it after the fact?
Well, I knew that we were treading on thin ice, to the point that he and I had a conversation at one point where there was casual may not be the word. It was a formal meeting, but, we talked about the option of bankruptcy, reorganization. So it was serious. It was very serious. Again, for those of us that did take those cuts in pay, it was real too. I mean, real stuff. Your check just shrunk a bunch after that. So, but we knew cash flow was bad. We got to get something hot. We had to get some talent over. Somebody's got to get hot. We got to start drawing. We got to get some pay-per-view attractions, et cetera, et cetera. But we didn't have that. We were still working toward that deal. But then, he said the Bret, I think that his words to me were the Bret deal now with this financial situation is going to be very problematic. Well, when somebody tells you that, here's what you don't have to be a mathematician or an MBA to figure out the fact that we got to fix this thing. So we either got to get an influx of new cash and be able to honor Bret Hart's contract, or we got to go to Bret and say, hey, look, we made a mistake. We didn't realize business was going to be this way. We don't have the cash flow. We can't honor our agreement, but we want to restructure. Much like you see in the NFL all the time. We want to restructure. And that's kind of where you kind of know that's one of those things is going to happen. But we didn't have a specific conversation about Bret, but I knew that his deal was tenuous. It was a little rough now because of the economy and our economy specifically.
Let's keep it moving here. We're going to talk about the go home edition of Raw on our way to King of the Ring. But first, I want to ask you about Great Sasuke. He held a press conference on May 28th in Tokyo to announce that he had signed with the WWF. He says the WWF offered him a 1-year contract, but he only agreed to a 6-month deal. How did Great Sasuke come to be on your radar? Is he a guy who's trying to send tapes? Are you guys actively looking for a way to compete with the luchadors on Nitro and the cruiserweights, or how does this come together?
Victor Quinones again brought him to us as we were trying to get more diversified and to find some new talents that were fresh talents. WCW had signed a lot of people. The indie situation then was not like as good as it is now, and so we needed some fresh talent that we could work with creatively, and that could offer something that we didn't have, and that was the Kaientai group, the junior heavyweights. So Sasuke was the boss of that group, Michinoku Pro. So that's how he came about. Again, Victor Quinones was our liaison with the Japanese and the Mexican promotion.
This go home edition of Raw opens up with the Undertaker. Vince is trying to get an explanation out of him for why he did what he did. And he explains that he wasn't doing that to protect himself, but the ones he loved. Paul Bearer wants to come out and say, hey, you've done enough talking. Maybe I should do some talking. And Bear's going to say that now that he controls both Mankind and the Undertaker, he's going to be the ruler of the world. And at that point, Sid's music hits and you exclaim, he's back. And you explain that he's been out with a lower lumbar back injury, and Sid sets the record straight that, first of all, fat man, you don't rule nothing. I rule the world. Sid's back here. Talk to me a little bit. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about Sid, but this is a guy who developed a reputation for being in and out. And there's lots of rumor and innuendo and sort of inside jokes about softball. Was he really out here with a lower lumbar injury? And, what can you tell us about Sid's return and his sabbatical, if you will?
Well, I had to believe that his back was bad and that, it was affecting his work, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of the boys will tell you that, it was softball season and he loved to play softball. And, he was an attraction in softball. You hit the long ball, as you can imagine. He wasn't a bunter. He didn't move runners around. He didn't sacrifice anybody. He hit the long ball. So, but Sid kept getting opportunities because of his amazing and obvious unlimited physical potential. He had an amazing look. He was athletic for a guy his size, and so he had everything. He had it, and but always something seemed to get in the way. Always something adversely affected the progress of this guy who really legitimately, if you're going to draw a picture of a big box office guy, then he's one of the guys you should draw, because he's 6'9", 300. He's ripped up. He looks great. And if the old Vince McMahon rule, you walk through the airport, is somebody going to notice him? You're damn right they are. So that was he just kept waiting that all the baggage of whatever it was, self-inflicted baggage or donated baggage on Sid, was going to go away, and he was going to finally be able to be what he wanted to be and needed to be. It just never did happen in WWE.
Let's talk a little bit about the way we build to this Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin match here. Originally, as we said, this was supposed to be Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. You might wonder, what was Steve Austin supposed to do? He's supposed to be finally paying off with a match with Brian Pillman. And they've been building this thing since the prior fall. It was the prior September or October when Austin broke into his house and Pillman pulled a gun. And this is supposed to be the big payoff. But according to the rumor and innuendo, Pillman wasn't all the way ready to go. Shawn now needed an opponent. So you guys pivot on the way to the pay-per-view just 6 days prior and say, nope, we're going to have the tag champs face each other. Were you disappointed that Brian wasn't able to go, or was this sort of an easy fix and you still had hope for the future?
Well, it was certainly an easy fix, and we had hope for the future. And yes, I was disappointed that Brian wasn't cleared. And the question was always going to be, then, will he ever be cleared?
Yeah, because since we should back that up, I guess. When he first signed with the company, he had been in a Humvee crash, and as a result, he just shattered his ankle, I believe, and was not able to perform. So we've got lots of stops and starts where we think he'll be ready here. Nope, he's not. Okay, we'll think he'll be ready here. Nope, he's not. Okay, we think he'll be ready here. Nope, he's not. And eventually they do one of these where it's going to be an angle because they know he's got to go have another surgery done. So on Superstars in the fall of 96, you have Austin put his foot in a chair, jump off the top, crush the ankle, quote unquote. Then he does the surgery. Now he's got the big cast on. That's when Austin breaks in. So he's moving around, but still not medically cleared. And it doesn't feel like at this point, you guys have gotten much of a return at all from your Brian Pillman investment.
No, unfortunately we didn't. His ankle got fused, so he couldn't bend it. So it really obviously restricts a very athletic 215, 20-pound guy's mobility. And a guy that size couldn't really afford to have that mobility restricted as it was. It was a heartbreaking thing, and I believe that it really contributed to Brian's death. The fact that he was so disappointed in his career because he knew in the back of his head that he could never do the athletic things that he used to do as Flying Brian with a fused ankle. It was sad, and you could see that emotionally it was really working on him. And he had some some drug and alcohol issues. I remember I had him drug tested somewhere. The night before we were in some town, and he was asleep on the floor in the dressing room. Of course, Jack Lanza gives me a call and tells me what happened. So I call the office and get my stuff together, and we get a drug test. Got a doctor there. He's got to pee in the bottle on the next night, and he was so irate. He called me at home, and I guess he forgot that, I'm living in Connecticut and he was in Washington State. It's like 10 o'clock in Washington State, so it's 1 a.m. for me. And the old phone rings, and Jan answers the phone, as she did more often than not. I think she got smart, finally moved the phone to my side of the bed. But I talked to him. He was cussing and raising hell, and I can't believe you do this to me. And I thought we were friends and all these things. And I said, Brian, we are friends. That's why I am doing it. Somebody's going to protect you from you. And so, he had some pain medicine in him that he didn't have a prescription for, I think. And some things, just maybe some steroids. I'm not real sure, but this day is minuscule, if he had any. But nonetheless, the ankle fuse broke his heart because he knew he could never do what he wanted to do. And that's why I kept trying to convince him that he could be the next Jesse Ventura and be a great, that crazy voice of his, a gravelly voice. He's very intelligent, very quick-witted, understood the business, very well-read, up in pop culture and all those good things. But boy, he just hated that. He thought that was a huge, huge come down and would make him much less of a man that he wanted to be perceived as. It was a very sad thing. That Humvee accident really, it didn't kill him. The accident didn't kill him, but the results of the accident, I think, led to his death.
We'll talk about Brian Pillman more another time, I'm sure. We see Vince interview the Road Warriors, and he's asking them if they ever had problems getting along, and of course they deny it. And he's asking this because they're about to take on Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin, who are both threatening to beat the shit out of each other. LOD gets the win by count out, so Austin and Michaels retain the tag titles. Then we see part 3 of the interview with Mankind, and you're asking what fuels the insanity, and he's telling the story about Cactus Jack, and we're finally acknowledging Cactus Jack, which WWF had really never done before. And he talks about the quote sadistic wrestling subculture in Japan with deathmatch wrestling. This was like bizarre to me as a longtime WWF fan to see you guys acknowledging anything else happening, much less deathmatch wrestling from Japan. What's Vince's stance on this? How did he soften? And what did he think of fucking deathmatch wrestling?
Well, it wasn't a matter of that we're going to start endorsing deathmatch wrestling. It was a matter that we're going to acknowledge that it exists. And that in itself was a major step forward for Vince. That there was a world outside WWF at that time. And as I said earlier, sometimes even the most established organizations, and there's no organization any more established than WWE, certainly none more profitable, that sometimes even those companies have got to sit back and say, we might want to put the reset button and change our philosophy a little bit and amend what we're doing creatively. Our presentation needs to be tweaked. Maybe that's time, maybe that's now for those guys. I don't have a clue. That's their deal. But bottom line is every company's got to do that periodically. In an entertainment world, you can't stay status quo. There's only a few things that work that way. Even the Jeopardy, this cat win all that money. They do a 30-minute show. It takes them 22 minutes of content. It's a little different animal, but the bottom line is most shows have to have constant tweaking. And I'm sure they've made some tweaks over the years, but nonetheless, it's a different animal. But it's hard to keep something on television the same year after year after year after year. Even we see our news change, and we see weathermen. Now we got weather women, and we got female meteorologists. We got female sports anchors. Things are changing, and so we need to change. And I think that our acknowledging these other organizations, and we kind of acknowledged that with the billionaire Ted stuff and all that stuff too. So it was just a matter of Vince changing his mind on how he was going to perceive things, how his positioning. And, some are saying, as I mentioned earlier, not being an asshole, but maybe it's time for him to do that again.
Let's talk a little bit about what's next on the show. We've got Undertaker and Sid for the world title, and you can't help yourself. You say that Sid swings the best baseball bat or best softball bat in all of the World Wrestling Federation, which is kind of fun.
What a wise ass.
Undertaker gets the pin. Of course, NOD interferes at the end once the match is over. And that's our go home show. Just a few weeks or a few months prior to this, Sid and Undertaker was the main event of WrestleMania. And here it's less than 5 minutes with a clean pin. Does that tell us that Sid's fallen out of favor, or is it just we're trying to sell the pay-per-view?
No, it told you, well, we're trying to sell the pay-per-view, obviously, but it told you that the front office had lost confidence in Sid at that point in time, and his priority is being reevaluated. So, the match that Undertaker and Sid had at WrestleMania 13, I'm sure if you ask both those gentlemen, they'd tell you that it wasn't their best match that they've ever been involved in. It was a little bit, but it had to follow Bret and Steve, and that's tough. That's really tough. So, especially on that night. So, they were in a tough spot, but nonetheless, Sid did kind of fall out of favor on that one. And it's unfortunate, Conrad, because again, I always thought that Sid had everything, look, demeanor, the whole 9 yards. It's for whatever reason, we just couldn't quite get him over the hump.
The show in the ratings winds up with a 2.78. Nitro that night gets a 3.28. Let's get to the real show. Reason we're here. King of the Ring 1997. You guys drew 9,312 fans. The gate's $202,963. The arena is set for 16,000, but only 9,300 are here. You once or twice in the show referenced that there's 10,000 fans here, but McMahon multiple times calls it a capacity crowd. And Vince always did that. He always called it a capacity crowd, even if it wasn't sold out. Do you think Vince knows what capacity crowd means?
Oh, I think he probably does. I think it's just part of his damn vernacular.
Sure.
It's like the old he said about me. He can't help himself. JR can't help himself. I don't think that's the promoter in him, and so he overlapping roles of being the promoter, the owner of the company, and the lead broadcaster. So no, he had a habit of doing that. You know, for all those years, we thought that the WrestleMania 3 did 93,000 people. Hell, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I saw it on closed circuit actually. But we found out at the end of the day, and when the newsletters and the Meltzers and the Kellers of the world found out it was 78,000, that was a headline. For whatever reason, you know, McMahon embellished this dome crowd. So I don't know. But yeah, I wasn't comfortable with that, and he never said anything to me about that though. It was all what I said was the truth, and it was a good crowd. The shots were good, but yeah, it was about half a house.
Let's talk a little bit about Vince as a broadcast partner. I, like you, didn't remember that you guys did commentary together on this. How would you categorize the roles? I know traditionally people think, okay, this guy's play-by-play, that guy's color, but a lot of times throughout this show, Vince is trying to do play-by-play, and that feels like that should be the other way around. Did you guys have a conversation about that? Or did you know, hey, it's his show, I'm just here to support him however I can?
I knew my role. My role was going to be the color guy. Lawler was not with us that night because he was in the tournament. So it was Vince and I, and so my role didn't change. This is always the lead. When it was he, Jerry, and myself, he was still always the lead. And then Jerry and I would fill in, basically Jerry first, and I would pick up whatever's left. I had no problem with that, quite frankly. But yeah, we knew what I knew what my role was going to be. That's why in that show, if folks go back and listen to it, you'll hear so much background information. I felt it was, my storytelling theory is that, we got to continue to tell the audience who these guys are and why they're here and et cetera, et cetera. So I did a lot of background information on that show. And I think I did it I was pleasantly surprised at how I did it when I watched the show back, because I didn't really step on any dramatic moments or high spots or false finishes or anything like that. It was done at a time where there's either wrestler separation or during an entrance. We get some of that background information in, but I thought it helped the show, and it told everybody who these guys were. And we had lost an audience. We're trying to gain an audience back. So we thought, with new people coming back, they might not know the backstory of all these cats. So that's kind of what we did. But I knew my role was going to be the color guy, and quite frankly, it worked out fine.
Your dark match that night was the Headbangers getting a win over Bart Gunn and Jesse James. That would have been a weird version of the New Age Outlaws. It's the wrong smoking gun here. The Headbangers get the win in 6 minutes and 10 seconds. And Meltzer would note, before the show started, they do an angle that's simply for the live crowd, where they're trying to remind everyone, hey, Mankind's a face now. So Mankind comes out to cheers since he's without Paul Heyman and cuts a babyface promo. And Lawler appears on the video screen and does a heel promo. I guess they just wanted to sort of prime the audience for our second match on the card. But let's talk about the first match. We open it up with Ahmed Johnson coming to the ring, or I guess he could have been Buck Johnson. Thankfully, Bill Watts wasn't around for that. Hunter Hearst Helmsley is out next. This is supposed to be his year in 1996 to win the King of the Ring. Of course, we know he's now going to claim that crown here in 97. They go 7 minutes and 42 seconds. This is a King of the Ring semifinal. The match is okay, but I was reminded watching this why I was not a huge Ahmed Johnson fan. What'd you think of the match, watching it back for the first time in 20-something years?
I thought Hunter got much out of Ahmed as could humanly be done. Ahmed was still very green. again, you get guys this great look, but I don't know if he had a feel for the game. And I thought he may have listened to the wrong people too. He seemed to always not trust anybody. And, you get in this entertainment world, you got to start trusting somebody somewhere. Find your little inner circles you can count on and trust those dudes. But I thought Hunter got about as much out of Ahmed as he was going to get. And you saw the value of Joni of China, how she was used. I can assure you that Paul Levesque helped lay out that match from start to finish, which shows you his ability to do those type things. And I thought he did a nice job. And but I think it was a surprise that Ahmed lost, because Ahmed kind of going into this thing was, we kind of made him the pre-tournament favorite because he was so impressive and he hadn't been touched.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would have thought that Ahmed Johnson was the favorite. He hadn't lost a lot on TV. It was a big deal when he finally did lose. You guys made him the Kuwaiti Cup champion once before. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, belief that Ahmed was going to be the guy, but Hunter picks up the win here with a very jacked China, and you're pushing that she's benching over 300 pounds. And it's remarkable to see this early footage of China, considering what we know she would look like when we knew her later, after she had some augmentation and some enhancements, a little nip, a little tuck. But seeing her in her 1997 form is probably the way I still remember her the most.
Yeah, it was brought back a lot of memories to see her. Another thing that brought back memories, folks, if you watch that show back on the WWE Network or YouTube or wherever you see it, me and Gene Okerlund voiced over the cold open like a voiceover guy. And I didn't realize that. I went back and listened to it the second time. It brought tears to my eyes because Gene's voice was full and clear and clean. And if you go back and watch this show only to hear Gene's open, which is like a minute, voiceover style, it'll be worth it. You'll appreciate his work, his skills at that time. But Joni was a big asset, and I got to hand it to Hunter. Hunter, not that Joni was not a dumb woman. She was not by any stretch, but Hunter really had a great feel for the pair of them, the character, and he did a great job in molding her and getting her to be in the right place, the right time, the right demeanor, and 09 yards. And she was very consistent with it. She played her gimmick very, very well. And we realized that they were going to be a money group pair. But at that time, you get the same thing you could tell with we talked about with Sid earlier. Ahmed, we kind of moved on from Ahmed. That's why Ahmed didn't win the tournament. He wasn't ready for it, and there was not a trust factor there that everybody was comfortable with.
I want to mention Jerry Lawler is in our next match here. And of course, everybody in this era is talking about how, Jerry Lawler's old or over the hill or whatever. He's only 47, and the Undertaker, who's going to wrestle tomorrow in Saudi Arabia, is 54. So just keep that in your purview when you watch King of the Ring 97 again. Mankind gets a win here over Jerry Lawler, 10 minutes, 24 seconds with the mandible claw. Of course, beforehand, we see an interview that, Mankind's trying for the crowd. It doesn't feel like anyone's really reacting to it beyond Vince McMahon, who's forced to. And then Lawler comes out and does his usual, hey, I'm going to crack jokes on everybody on the way there. What'd you think of the match? Meltzer gave it a 1 3/4.
I thought it was better than that after watching it again. It was everything I thought it would probably be. I wasn't disappointed. They did not do anything I thought they should have done or whatever. So I disagree with Dave on that one. I thought it was a little bit better than a 1.5, but nonetheless, it shows you again the magic of the heel Jerry Lawler. So if any guys are listening, any students of the game that want to look at somebody that's textbook, or you're a wrestler and you want to understand more about crowd psychology, then that's a great 10 minutes and 24 seconds of your time that I would certainly check out.
Let's talk a little bit about the next match. But before we do, I want to talk about Brian Pillman. He's doing an interview backstage. Steve Austin sneaks up behind him. We, the viewer at home, can see that Austin's behind him, but of course Pillman has no idea he's right behind him. And then Austin attacks him and then eventually puts his head in a toilet bowl. And magically, as luck would have it, there's a camera over the toilet. So we can, I don't know who installed that. I don't know if that was Klondike Bill or who, but there's a camera over the toilet and you see Pillman's head go into the toilet. And of course, Austin flushes. Who hands that piece of creative to Pillman? And does he feel like, oh shit, man, I got to get this ankle working, because they're going to do all kinds of weird shit to me if I don't?
Well, maybe T.L. Hopper actually had that idea. I'm not sure. T.L. Hopper, the plumber with the plumber crack. I'm thinking that's a creative idea. It might have been a Russo idea. I'm not real sure, to be honest with you. It came from creative, but I could promise you that if Steve and Brian had not liked it, thought it was entertaining, then they wouldn't have done it. And they had the clout. Both of them had the clout to say, I'm not going to stick my head in a toilet stool. But I thought one of the great shots there, if you guys again go back and see this, Brian's hair, it's like his hair, his head is in the toilet, and his hair is all over it looks like a big ball of hair in a toilet stool, like if somebody, a cat spit a big cat a hairball. It was funnier than hell, but it showed that Austin didn't care about anything or anybody, do anything to prove his point, et cetera, et cetera. He's the rattlesnake, and rattlesnakes don't make good corporate pets, somebody once said.
Next up, we've got Goldust working with Crush. Meltzer would write, this match killed the crowd. Wow. He gave it a dud rating. Not a great match. Is this just, they don't gel? I mean, some of this is blamed on Crush in the Observer. Meltzer would write, Crush is just awful. Basically, he's Jim Duggan without the charisma. Lots of long nerve holds and chin locks. Is this just, the chemistry's not there, or does Crush just suck?
Well, I think there's no chemistry there. There was no chemistry there. They didn't jive. I think sometimes, Brian, AKA Crush, was very high on his, on himself. And I understand, and that's good, but he might not have been as good as he perceived that he was. He had he was gifted, no doubt. And a nice guy, good-looking guy, strong. When they did the vignettes, WWE the vignettes with him in Hawaii, I thought that was his best work, best positioning. He never did make a great heel to me, and he and Dustin just did not have good chemistry for whatever reason. It's not, it's not a bad thing. A lot of guys, nobody's ever going to tell me that Austin and Undertaker had great chemistry together. They didn't. But they had a lot of matches, but they didn't have their best matches with each other as they do with other people. That's just a chemistry thing. And that's kind of what we're here with Crush. I don't think he was a bad worker. I don't think he was a great worker, but he certainly was better than that match should have indicated.
Let's talk about the next match. It's Owen Hart teaming up with Jim Neidhart and Davey Boy Smith to take on Psycho Sid and Legion of Doom. The Hart Foundation get the win in 13 minutes and 37 seconds, star and 3/4. Maybe not the best match these guys ever had. Lots of good workers in here, lots of Hall of Famers, but I thought this was a bit of a miss. What'd you think?
Yeah. Too many cooks in the kitchen, I think. Too many agendas to take care of, in my view. They beat Sid in the sixth. Owen beat Sid in a little sunset flip thing. When Sid was looking to do a power bomb, I think Davey Boy. I loved Owen and the Anvil and Davey. It was clear to me that while Davey and Neidhart were very, very viable, valuable Hall of Fame guys, that the star of that team was Owen Hart. We forget how good he was. He was amazing in this match. So I would say that if Meltzer believes that it was a 1 3/4 star, it might not have been 1 star without Owen in the match. But again, the chemistry was tough and not good chemistry in that match. Not a great booking by us, quite frankly. Thank God Owen had a good night, and but the match should have been better with all that star power in there. But there, you got to remember, man, there's a lot of egos, a lot of alpha males, a lot of guys don't like to sell. And when you get into a situation where guys believe that selling is a weakness, not only are they showing their ignorance, it's also going to make the match suck. You got to sell, no matter who you are. Andre sold, so why can't you? Type thing.
Never heard that before. That's a great line. Next up, Hunter Hearst Helmsley becomes king of the ring. He beat Mankind in 19 minutes and 26 seconds to win the tournament. Meltzer would say the fans were not into this first half of the match. He says that eventually they worked hard enough that the crowd started to get behind the match, but quote, they must have seen this as an unworthy finale. Meltzer only gave it 3.5 stars. Mankind's crawling to the back, on his hands and knees. This of course happens after, an absolute melee after the match. Helmsley's pulling off his mask and all kinds of crazy spots. They're going through tables and, they're breaking the scepter over him. And it's one of the first big beatings that we see Mick take in the WWF. And he's doing this, of course, to get the babyface sympathy. What'd you think of the execution, and what'd you think about the long delayed crowning moment where Hunter finally became king of the ring?
I really liked the match. I thought that Hunter and Mick did a really good job in Joni. They did almost 20 minutes of intense action, told a great story, very physical. They added some very unique spots to it. So I liked the match. I thought it was really, really good, and happy for both guys, quite frankly. So, we knew Mick was on his way to being something special without winning the King of the Ring tournament. He was getting there very, very readily and very obviously. As far as Paul Levesque is concerned, his time had come, and he'd earned that opportunity to be the King of the Ring, and I thought it was a good move. I was never a proponent of this punishment bullshit. Guys, the curtain call thing, and then he's going to be punished, and all this. Whether that happened, which I assume it did in a lot of ways, it never happened that way with my mind. I never did anything in booking him or whatever. I could only book him to where he was on television. So it's like saying, well, JR, you could have put him in main events. Not if he wasn't on television in a role. That'd be stupid, disconnected booking. So that was not a thing for me. I didn't like it. I liked the match, but I didn't like the criticisms of they did too much. Mick may have done too much. He was taking bumps in the apron to the concrete floor, dropping elbows, and there's no way you can protect yourself. It's one of those moves where you cringe when guys do moves that are unprotectable. It's just a fait accompli that at some point you're going to take your last one like that. So we always had to try to restrict Mick, but it's hard to do. He's going to do what he got to do. But I thought they had a hell of a match, Conrad, and I was glad to see how it came out. It's one of those matches where a guy can lose and still get over. And Foley lost, but his toughness and the story we told, I think, made him even more memorable, or as memorable if he had won the damn thing.
Let's talk a little bit about the post-match where Hunter destroys the crown. Meltzer would freestyle that, hey, maybe this means the gimmick is it's going to be King Hunter and Queen China. But the guy who made the crown, Andre Freitas, down at AFX Studios in Marietta, Georgia, says that the reality is Hunter fucking hated the crown, and he would stomp it every night. So the WWF kept asking for more. He just didn't like the look of it, and as a result would try to turn it into a piece of business where he would destroy it whenever they would have another one for him. Do you remember hearing that for whatever reason, Hunter didn't like wearing the fucking crown?
Yeah, he didn't like it. Too gimmicky. Wasn't his style. Thought it didn't fit his persona. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's almost a rib. Those guys you got to take your crown on the road with you now. It's like a lot of guys. There's been guys I know in the business, Conrad, that didn't want to be a champion because they
didn't want to carry the belt.
They didn't want to take the damn thing through TSA and security and take it with them. So silly shit. But so it came. So they thought of it more as a prop than something that have to draw money and something real and tangible, like the fans would perceive it as. So
I guess, and I know this sounds weird, but why the insistence on Hunter using the crown? You didn't have Austin do it the year before in '96. I mean, that would have been super goofy, right? Stone Cold King Austin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think he may have thought he was in that same level of perception. It just didn't fit his gimmick in his mind's eye. And so he didn't use it. And, there's where you listen to your talent. I didn't it wasn't my idea to have him do the crown stuff. I'm with him. It's kind of hokey. And so I agreed with the hokiness of it, but you should always listen to your talents to tell you why they're uncomfortable or whatever, and how we can make amends to this thing and get back to where we want to be. And I don't know that he was ever asked that question. He had to work very hard to get back in the good graces of the chairman.
Talk to me a little bit about because we've covered, the curtain call here on the show recently. We've established that he was supposed to be king of the ring in 1996. He's going to get that moment here in 97. When do you remember it becoming clear that, okay, we're going with Hunter on this one?
I think around this time. Yeah, around this time, the commitment to make him the champion or the king of the ring was, nobody was not met with a lot of, with any pushback. So my role is a different role than the creative guys. See, I wanted him in the locker room. I wanted him to be involved. I liked his intelligence, his intellect, his IQ. He was very reliable. He was not a drug and alcohol guy. You always knew he was going to be there, and he had a great skill set. Killer Kowalski had taught him very, very well. So, but about that time, it's a year later from all that curtain call stuff, and we all had slept since then. Let's go. So, young guy, to get 6'4", looks good, and student of the game. Why not invest in him? And I think I remember signing him to $1 million a year downside contract, sitting on an amble case in the back of the Evansville Arena. I remember vividly. We signed a contract there, and he just wanted to make sure that he was getting the same thing that we were paying downside. We're paying the other top guys, and that was the maximum at that time that talents were being paid. No one in the company at that time had over $1 million downside guarantee.
What year would that have been, if you had to guess?
Oh, 90, around this time.
No way, not 97. You guys are hemorrhaging cash. So 99 maybe? Because 98's when he got hot, when Austin leaves.
It might have been. It might have been. Conrad's hard to remember these many years back.
Sure.
I remember sitting on an anvil case for some crazy reason. I remember being in Evansville. I remember it being in the 90s. So
good enough.
Well, the fucking day, I don't remember what year it was. I could go back and look at when we were in Evansville around those times, I guess. But he was a good investment, and it obviously panned out. Our judgment was right. He was a very good investment, and he's panned out and made the company a lot of money and himself a lot of money, and he's done well marrying.
Yes, no doubt. Nobody's going to argue that. Let's go to the next match. Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin. They go to a double DQ in 22 minutes and 29 seconds. Normally when you hear double DQ, you think, well, that's a fuck finish. This is going to get murdered in the Observer, but it didn't. It got 4 stars. I guess we should mention here that Shawn Michaels goes for the super kick. Austin catches the foot, hits the Stone Cold Stunner, but there's no ref to count the pin because wouldn't you know it, there was a ref bump. Austin gets up and he's so mad at the groggy ref that he gives him the stunner. And then Michaels super kicks Austin and has him pinned. But of course the referee was just pinned. It's referee Tim White. So a second ref comes in, but instead of counting as Michaels had him pinned, he goes to check on the first ref. White eventually gets up and counts as Michaels has Austin pinned, but Austin kicks out. So now Michaels is frustrated that he didn't get the pin when he had him down that long. So he super kicked the second referee, and Earl Hebner, a third referee, comes in and DQs both referees or both competitors for attacking different referees. The fans are chanting bullshit here. But this is a pretty cool match. I enjoyed it. 2 of the all-time greats, and we're getting a sneak peek of what WrestleMania is going to look like. What, 6 months later, 9 months later?
Yeah. They I thought they had a hell of a match, and it's kind of a forgotten match.
Right.
It's not one of those matches. If you think about Shawn versus Steve, you think about
WrestleMania.
You think about WrestleMania, where Steve beat Shawn for the title. That's the primary thing that comes to my mind. This King of the Ring match had kind of escaped me. I had forgotten about that match. I really enjoyed watching it. They told a hell of a story, and then the Bret Hart Foundation stuff was also played in that deal because Bret was supposed to come down and do commentary, and we lost it. We got screwed up on our headsets. So I think Foley and Hunter demolished our area that actually screwed up some headsets. So we didn't have an extra pair of headsets for Bret to use. And there's a little dialogue between Vince and I about him. I'll take mine, I'll give him mine or whatever. But it just never did work out that way. And so Bret didn't come out there, couldn't do color, but it was a chaotic, all that was chaos. And the Hart Foundation had a lot to do with the success of that Shawn and Steve match. I thought this is the thread of what they're doing, and here they are. And we told multiple stories in one match. We've married Steve and Bret back together. We established Shawn has issues, obviously, and the Hart Foundation loathes Shawn. And they'd have got Steve too if he'd been in the ring, but he left to go get Bret. So it was one of those Wild West nights, and I really enjoyed it. That was a lot of fun. If you watch that again, folks, watch the interview that Bret did before and all the interaction with the Hart Foundation, and then the post-match that Conrad outlined was some pretty damn good stuff. And it just showed that these two, look, remember, Austin and Shawn were the tag team champions at that time.
Right.
They were the top tag team in the WWF, and they're fighting each other because of the circumstance we outlined. So, but they had one hell of a good match. And if you like great wrestling and old school philosophies, selling, comebacks, logic, this is a good one to watch.
Yeah, it's fun too to see Shawn with an edge here because, of course, in this era, Austin's running around flipping everybody off, and when Shawn flips him off, it gets a reaction from the crowd, and half the crowd at this point loves Shawn, and the other half loves Austin. There's a lot of fan response from this one, so it makes for a good viewing. Go check it out. If you're gonna watch one match this week from your Wayback Machine, go watch this one. Next up, though, the main event, not as good, 2.25 stars in the Observer. Undertaker and Farouk go 13 minutes and 43 seconds. Of course, Undertaker gets the win. Meltzer would say that the NOD had a lot of presence when they started the gimmick, but it's lost a lot of steam, probably because it's been overexposed. What do you think about Farouk's performance here and just the gimmick of Nation of Domination? Was it running its course here?
Yeah, it was beginning to run its course a little bit, but I love if we could have, in today's world, again, go back to today and then you could kind of get away with some of this, the racial overtones, the John Carlos, 1968, protest in the Olympics. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, like their names were, they were protesting how blacks were treated in America, with a black fist raised in the air, very memorable. So that militancy was not something new to our psyche, but it had not been played out that definitively in wrestling before. That's why all those years that in wrestling, if you go back and remember the first heel I remember in wrestling, there was a main event level heel because he was not afraid not to take the heat of the crowd, was Ernie Ladd. Most promoters were very cautious that they had their black representative on their roster. We have one scenario was a babyface because you couldn't stand to get the heat that the white audience might have on a black heel. Ernie didn't care; he just cared about the green. That was money. But I thought the thing started to run its course a little bit, but I liked the concept of it. I thought it was an interesting, compelling, almost uncomfortable watch sometimes, very controversial. But I don't know if it was ahead of its time or behind its time, Conrad, but for heels, it worked out real well. And they had a good cast. I thought D'Lo Brown did a good job there. Eventually, Godfather in that group. I thought little Clarence Mason was pretty entertaining. He looked the part. He was a lawyer, for real. So, I don't know. I liked the thing. And if I was booking today, would I do it today? Of course not. No. But I liked it then. It worked out very well. And Ron Simmons deserved that opportunity after being a WCW World Champion, great athlete, great accolades, and he's been loyal to us. Ronnie is a great team player. And he and Bradshaw and the APA were a very, very underrated tag team. We should do a show sometime about tag teams and talk about the ones I've seen and talked about, and some of them were underrated, some of them maybe overrated. But Ron and Bradshaw are very, very good together. But I thought they had a solid Undertaker match. It was very ground and pound oriented, very fundamental, very deliberate. But that's what we expected, and that's what we got. And so, I didn't have an issue with it. I thought it was a pretty good match. because again, the booking side of it was very complicated because Conrad, there's so many moving parts. There's so many variables. There's so many spin-off characters in this one match. So I thought that was managed well, and those guys had a solid outing.
Well, and we hope we had a solid outing here for you today on this episode of Grilling JR. And I want to tell everybody that we've got the rest of this Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels story, because the plot thickens the very next day after King of the Ring 97. This is where we see the backstage fight happen in Hartford between Shawn Michaels and Bret. And we're going to get to that when we cover Canadian Stampede, which is our next pay-per-view in 1997, and arguably one of the best pay-per-views the company ever produced. Let's run down what's coming up here on the next few weeks with Grill and JR. Next week, we're going to visit one of the biggest moments in JR's career, King of the Ring 1998. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday and every Thursday at 6 a.m. on your drive to work right here on Grill and JR.
Hey, this is the National Treasure, Nick Goldust, and I am recommending that you go to savewithconrad.com for all your home buying needs. If you listen to any of Conrad's shows, which I do on a regular basis, it's pretty hard to miss the fact that he's in the mortgage business. When the time came that we were looking to buy a place, it was really my first choice. I just got the feeling right from the start that Jimmy and Conrad and the whole team really wanted us to succeed. It felt like it should. It felt like we were all on the same team. You know, it felt like we were in business together, which is, to me, is really how a home purchase and a mortgage process should feel. Not only would I recommend Save with Conrad to friends and coworkers, I have many times already. If I know that they're in the, they're house hunting, my first recommendation to them always is get in touch with Conrad. Like, his team are the real deal, and they will be straight up with you and do everything they can to get you in that house.
NMLS number 32416, equal housing lender, savewithconrad.com.